thanks for inviting me to Bristol to go and talk about permaculture and veganism and stuff like that. My name's Graham Burnett. Maybe just a quick go around to say your name, and we'll go around. And some people might remember some people's names, and it's always a good way to start. So I'm Graham.
Hello, I'm Anna.
Okay.
I'm Bo. I'm Chloe.
Nania.
Steve.
Caroline.
Sunny.
Mike.
Philippa.
Hannah.
Amelia.
Hello. Pete. I'm Stefan. Nice.
Tamika.
Josh.
Margot. Callie.
Yusuf.
Jay. Debbie.
I am Lisa.
I am Adam.
Okay, I'm Graham still. Yeah, I think those that were here earlier, the plan was we were going to have a little bit of a talk, show a film, a couple of films, then do a Q&A, but due to technical things, the film isn't happening now, so just had a quick rethink and just thought we'd just do like a bit of chat and a bit of Q&A, and then hopefully a bit of music. I think some people are coming along to do a bit of music later, so hopefully people will feel they've had a worthwhile evening, I hope. So, yeah, one of the reasons I'm here, I've just published a book which I'm carried all the way up here in a suitcase and really don't want to carry back because they weigh a ton. It's a Permaculture Beginner's Guide, so this is a book I've just had published just for Christmas, and I suppose it is about making those connections between permaculture and kind of veganism, the vegan movement, whatever. I suppose just to tell my story quickly, how I came to where I am at the moment. I suppose even when I was kind of very young, some of my earliest memories were like taking an interest in kind of the natural world. I used to have walks in the woods with my grandfather. This would have been like mid 1960s, late 1960s. They're some of my earliest memories of going for walks in the woods, and we kind of study, like, you know, those big ants that go around in the wood and the floor. We kind of study those for hours on end and sort of catch spiders in jars and watch them and things. We always let them go again afterwards, but they're kind of my earliest memories, sort of getting that kind of interest in nature, I guess. But one of my other really early memories was like Sunday dinners, you know, at my grandparents' house. Every Sunday afternoon we go round to my grandparents' house, and it was like, you know, traditional roast dinner. And I had this thing about, I think subconsciously I always got that connection between, you know, I didn't really know why, consciously why, but I always had that connection between, like, you know, the cow in the field that we'd see. We'd go for drives in my granddad's car and you'd see like cows in the field and things like that, and sheep or whatever, and kind of this stuff that was on the plate, the meat on the plate. And I didn't really kind of know why, but I always remember like being really like, not being kind of quite repulsed by meat. I used to cut, one of my memories is I cut it into tiny little slices so I could swallow it without having to chew it, because, you know, there's just something about meat I just didn't like. And I think it was because I was kind of making that kind of connection, possibly subconsciously, I don't know. So I've always kind of been in that kind of direction, I guess. But it was like like 1977, which was like the year, you know, two important things happened for me. It was the year of punk, you know, the whole punk thing happened, and it was the year I kind of became vegetarian, because there were like some older kids, you know, I didn't really know, I suppose I was aware of the word vegetarian, but I didn't really kind of know any vegetarians or anything. But, you know, like some older kids, sort of, you know, maybe a couple of years older at school or whatever, I thought, oh, you can live without eating meat, you know, you can actually do that, can you? You don't just sort of die if you don't eat meat. And so I became vegetarian in 1977. And then it was probably about 1984 that actually became vegan myself. I sort of made, you know, just couldn't, you know, just became a lot more aware that there was a lot of, or just as much kind of cruelty, if you like, or, you know, exploitation of animals involved in the dairy industry. I mean, I'm guessing, I don't know who's vegan and who isn't in this room, but you know, people who are vegan are probably aware there's a connection between, you know, sort of dairy industry and kind of animal exploitation. That, but I didn't really make that connection until, well, I had kind of made that connection, but got to the point where you think, I can't do this anymore, I can't be part of this personally anymore. I'd like to just preface everything I'm saying with, for me personally, I don't know, some people might have publicised this sort of thing on Facebook and that, and I've had feedback from people, forcing your views down people's throats, That's not where I'm coming from at all. I'm prefacing everything with, for me personally, choices I've made, decisions I've made, are kind of, what works for me. I'm not here to judge what other people eat, what their lifestyles are, anything like that. So I just want to make that clear. I'm not here to force anything down anybody's throat, contrary to what you might sometimes hear, about, when the vegan opens their mouth, they're trying to, ram in your views on me though. So just wanted to get that little preface there, that everything, So for me personally, I thought I can't be part of this anymore, so I gave up. I became vegan in 1984. But about a year or so later, I think kind of made this connection, maybe a slightly deeper connection, that I came across a magazine. There was a split in the vegan society. Actually, there was a breakaway group called the Movement for Compassionate Living that kind of split away from the vegan society. It's like get two human beings together and there'll be a split, faction forms. But this particular split was around. There was a movement within the vegan society that was looking at kind of what they call ecological veganism, and I picked up some pamphlets that they published and became kind of aware that I think one of their pamphlets was called "Veganism is Not Enough," and it was kind of making that connection about ecological, how our food is produced, that it's unsustainable, and I thought, that's kind of, that resonated with me quite a lot. And I think it was around that time, or maybe a bit later than that actually, came across, it was a few years later actually, came across this word permaculture. Be interesting perhaps to hear where, people are at with the word permaculture. I mean, I've done a couple of these talks and they've been like to a permaculture audience, if you like, and there's kind of some shared understanding of what the word means. I thought it might just be worth chucking out a few what's the word permaculture mean maybe to some people in this room at this point in time. I'm not sure if I'm talking to a permaculture audience or a vegan audience, or both or neither at the moment, so it might just be interesting to hear. So this we're using common language here, it might be good to just hear.
So I did shift with Sarah a few years ago, and I'm working on my permaculture diploma and a lifelong interest in the environment. And permaculture at the moment is a fascinating word, and I find that, like you said, you get two human beings in a room, you get a split. It means an awful lot of different things to different people, and depending on what they know. And when I talk to farmers, it's a dirty word, and sometimes perhaps with a little bit of good reason. A lot of people view it as a middle class, liberal thing. So a lot of people tend to talk permaculture and don't necessarily follow it in their own lives, which is the way of anything. So permaculture is a great concept. The word, I think, has become a little bit devalued just recently, and now that's why you're seeing regen ag becoming really popular. People are just giving it a different word. But actually, I still believe in it. I think it's a great thing, permaculture. If you follow the basic tenets of it, it's good.
So what's reaching out?
Sorry?
Did you say reaching out?
Regen ag.
Oh, okay.
Regenerative
explain what?
agriculture.
Yeah, sorry.
It's essentially broad scale permaculture.
See, I don't know what permaculture is really, so I've come to find out.
Okay.
But the words, to me, I'm guessing it's something about sustainability. It's something about not taking away more than you put back in. But I don't know if that's right.
Okay, that sounds good.
And can I just say, the reason I'm here, I do happen to be a vegan, and I'm interested to hear about the connections, but also I've just taken on an allotment.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I'm not a farmer or big scale agriculturalist, I'm very sort of very, very small holding, and I'm interested to know, from this evening, what practical things I can take away.
Okay.
If any.
Okay. Okay. Anyone else like to just say maybe what permaculture means to them?
Well, my very simplistic understanding of it is just humans learning to live within their local environment in a way that, as you say, does, instead of taking away from the space around you, you're actually learning to enhance it, so that you're living in a way that's enhancing everything around you.
I think you were talking about the relationship between veganism and permaculture, and for me it's just about being conscious and aware of how our food is produced and try to be as ethical in what we choose to eat and how we produce it as much as we can.
I'd say it's like a closed system of the way that you can grow food in using different zones, and some people call it lazy gardening. And though I don't think it's that lazy. But and like I work for Transition Network, and Transition is sort of quite based on permaculture principles as well. No waste and that sort of thing, and maximising yields and.
Okay.
For me, I thought it was. I think of it as being about kind of recycling, as well, and like reusing things, like as much as you can, like for other purposes or for the same purpose. So that could be like in building things as well, or whatever. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Anyone else want to add to the collective definition?
I guess for me it goes beyond just kind of your food or your that kind of system. It's a whole principle and ethics that you can apply to life and how you interact with people, how you interact with your community, and how we all come together to act sustainably. That doesn't just have to be our food production, it has to be everything in a complex system that kind of has feedback loops, and we can recycle things, and we can do things in a holistic way, really.
So yeah, had a few kind of ideas around kind of what permaculture kind of might be. Some of the kind of keywords that came out there, I think the word connection came out. I think the word ethical came out, words like principles came out. But I think the thing for me that permaculture really, it's about sort of, I don't like saying intelligent design these days, it's got other connotations, but it is about kind of conscious design, I think. Actually the word sustainable was mentioned, and was it Paul? Pete. You talked about I think there's this thing around sustainability at the moment. It's kind of one of those words that's has been a little bit devalued. Sometimes what does sustainability mean is kind of quite an interesting question in itself. We've got government who talks about economic sustainability. I don't think they're talking about the same thing I'm talking about if I talk about sustainability. So I kind of quite like Pete's word regenerative. That we don't just want to sustain just means it can keep going on indefinitely. Regenerative, I think, it means you're actually regenerating the land, actually not just keeping the land producing whatever it is indefinitely, but you're actually repairing the land, actually. So to me, I think permaculture is this thing about, it's not just about sustainability, it's about regenerative relationships with kind of the planet and ecosystems. And the other word that was used there was ethics. I think it's an ethical design system. So in a way, it's a regenerative ethical design system. Perhaps I think might be a good kind of soundbite. Well, permaculture was looking for the perfect soundbite all the time, to describe permaculture. But I guess a regenerative design system with an ethical basis. And the ethics really of permaculture, there's, I don't know, people heard the term earth care, people care, and fair shares. They're kind of almost like the cornerstones of permaculture design, if you like. It's kind of that in our activities, what we should be doing in our activities or our relationships with the world or the earth. We should be caring for the earth. We should be caring for people, and fair shares, which is about kind of distribution of wealth, or if you like, or distribution of resources. And another way used to be said sharing the surplus. So, you know, there's enough for, I think that's a quote from Gandhi, there's enough for all our need but not for all our greed, which I think has got a nice summary. So to me, those actually resonated quite in my particular understanding of how veganism fits with permaculture perhaps as well. You know, I think they're very open to interpretation, I think, those kind of three ethics, but to me they kind of do fit well with, you know, we've got a sticker in our front room window which says, what's it, veganism, was it animals, people, environment, and that almost seems like a similar little triad to the earth care, people care, fair shares. You know, it's fairly interchangeable to me. I wonder if anyone else can see any ways that, you know, that veganism might fit into that kind of framework of ethics, any other ideas around that.
Not using animal products in your gardening, like you know, bone meal or chicken manure pellets or that sort of thing.
Could well be, yeah.
There's the non-exploitation aspect. I think non-exploitation is it should be quite key to permaculture practice and kind of underpinning veganism as well.
I suppose the earth care is kind of quite a straightforward one, really, you know. But what about sort of people care? How does veganism and people care? Is there an interlocking there at all, or do they come together at all?
There's a lot of questions about whether you can feed all people and all the animals that we breed or eating. Whereas if you fed people using the food, then you'd have the food that you've grown rather than feeding animals and then feeding people the animals, then you'd have enough to feed everyone.
So actually, you know, by reducing our kind of reliance on animal products, we could actually massively, you know, reduce our kind of ecological footprint on the land. There was a figure. It's quite an interesting story. The Vegan Society used to have a figure that if everybody in the country became vegan, you could feed the entire population on 25% of the land that's kind of currently available. And I've used that figure myself in a few books and pamphlets, but when I was putting this book together, I thought, I'm going to be pulled up on figures in here. I know I am. So I actually contacted the Vegan Society. I mean, I've seen that. You know, if you search on the internet, you find that term. You know, you find that everywhere. So I actually got in touch with the Vegan Society. I said, "Where's that figure come from?" And they said, "We don't know." So, well, do you think you can find out? You know, which research papers? It's just this figure that's bandied about, and it's been going. You know, it's been bandied about for years. So they were doing their research. I was, you know, what papers did that come from and everything, and the closest they could find for reference for that figure was me, saying in a really old publication. So I'd kind of quoted an even older Vegan Society publication, which has probably disappeared into the mist of somewhere, and in turn became so. Which is a little bit one of those kind of, you know, reciprocal things. So I thought, I'm just not going to use that figure. So I did some more research. I used Simon Fairley. I don't know if people have heard of a guy called Simon Fairley. He's written a book called Benign Extravagance or something. And so he's not at all pro-vegan himself. So I thought, if I use his figure, he's the guy that's going to be on me, I know, for writing this book. So, you know, pulling it apart. So when he goes, where did you get your figure from? I can say, I've got it from you. So I used his. So his figure, because he actually looked at these different. He wrote an article called "Can Britain Feed Itself?" and he looked at various scenarios, like, you know, conventional agriculture, chemical agriculture, a vegan permaculture, vegan chemical production, and the figure he came up for vegan permaculture, he's saying that the country could be self-sufficient for food, fibre and fuel on 1/3 of the agricultural land. So I thought that's good enough for me. 1/3 to a half. It's not quite as optimistic as the 25% of the land, but I think it's still, it does show that, you know, if we massively reduced our reliance on animal products, we could free up a lot more land, you know, for less intensive uses, a lot more land given back to kind of, you know, nature's purpose. Again, that's another key thing about permaculture is, you know, giving back land to nature's purposes. It's not all just there for us to use, it's for all the other, you know, animals and creatures and what have you. So, yeah, so I think it's definitely that brings together the earth care and the people care and the fair shares, just in that, you know, how we can actually massively reduce our inputs, you know, on imported crops, for example, you know, that most of which depend on, you know, fossil fuel usage, create pollution, all this, that and the other, takes away land that other people could be, you know, in other countries that could be used for feeding the populations of those countries rather than cash crops and everything. So they're all in there, you know, the earth care, people care, fair shares, they're all kind of in there, I think. Yeah, so any other examples people might be able to think of, you know, where the earth care, people care and fair share, there might be some crossover between sort of permaculture and veganism.
I think the meat industry is such big business now. It's far removed from a farmer keeping a couple of goats and a cow in a field. It's huge, international, massive business, and some of the practices are not only wasteful of use, but they're completely unscrupulous to people's needs. And I've read stories of people in South America who used to grow their own vegetables around their village. And that land was all bought up for making a cash crop to be fed to animals in our country, and then they actually couldn't grow any of their own food. They had their land taken off them, so they really suffered directly because of that.
Definitely, yeah. I think even more fundamentally, there can be sort of something like one of the stories. Bill Mollison, you know, he was there's a guy called Bill Mollison who was one of the kind of, who's the guy who actually came up with the word permaculture. That he tells a story, you know, so he was one of the kind of founders of the permaculture movement, if you like. But he tells a story as when he was a young man, he worked in the logging industry in Australia, like clear felling forests for whatever products, you know, paper, building materials, whatever it was, probably mostly paper, I'd imagine, the paper mills and stuff. But one of his observations was very much about how it's not only the landscape being denuded and the environmental damage, but the way the people working in that industry, how kind of dehumanised and brutalised they were. So I think there's that thing also, you know, I don't want to generalise, but there can be, you know, the people actually working in those industries can be kind of quite brutalised themselves. I think that's another kind of maybe slightly more subjective thought about, you know, the people care side of, you know, is it actually good for our, I hesitate to use the word souls, but is it actually good for our souls to, you know, be doing this stuff, you know? I'd say I personally don't have a massive issue with, you know, the small scale farmer who's got a few sheep and cows and some chickens or whatever. It is the thing I have an issue with is the, you know, the industrialisation of, you know, agriculture, I guess, animal-based agriculture and plant-based agriculture, I guess. Sorry.
Well, I don't want to be difficult. Permaculture is the way it's designed is that you essentially mimic natural systems, and you know the way that things cycle in nature is what we would try and copy as a permaculture design. And animals are always an intrinsic part of that. So, you know, be interested in your view. You kind of answered it. You just said you don't really have a problem with small scale people who keep their animals well. So that was really what I was going to ask about.
It does raise an interest. I mean, I've had the question asked to me, you know, like, is it actually possible to have an animal-free, you know, permaculture system? And my answer is, well, no. And I don't think it's desirable either, because how are you going to fence out the earthworms? How are you going to fence out the bees that come and... So the animals are there, you know.
Mammal-free system.
Yeah, well, or large ruminants, I guess, but which I think, yeah, it's perfectly possible to have systems that don't have, large ruminants and that. But in terms of actual animals, yeah, they're going to be there. We'll encourage them to be, they're there for pest control, they're adding fertility, they're building soil, doing all the stuff they do. But I think, we're talking about not including animals there where the relationship is exploitative. That's what I'd say. And I guess it's fuzzy boundaries. It's people, I've got a few chickens and stuff. I personally, it's not something I do personally, but I don't have a big issue with someone who's got a few chickens in there.
It's quite difficult to know where to draw the line, isn't it? I've got a pal who's got 6 ducks, and he loves them to bits. He absolutely adores them and looks after them like they're children, but he eats the eggs. And it seems so harmless in a way, but.
So Nicole, did you want to?
I think it's like it kind of reinforces the status of animals as property. I'm like Graham, I would always put more energy and focus into resisting industrial animal agriculture because of the harm. But I do think some small scale systems do perpetuate this idea that animals are ours to have in our homes to entertain us, and but I think Graham's right, I call them self-determining animals, like wildlife. So on our vegan design course that we teach, we ask people to say what's your favourite animal in a system? Oh, I love blue tits, I love worms, I love hedgehogs. We want all of them, we want them abundantly, but they don't have to be slaves, they can be free.
And that question you also got, where do you draw the line? I think there's this thing about, to me, permaculture, it's about a bit of a continuum sort of thing, and I think I have the same kind of view about this. I'm not even sure if I identify as a vegan personally, because it's a word that carries a lot of baggage sometimes. I think about. I don't know. To me, veganism, to me, being vegan is more about an attitude rather than an absolute. I think. Because you can kind of get into this weird place of, we live in there's all sorts of exploitative relationships and all sorts of things going on. So why should it just be, just focusing on that, I don't know, I remember getting into some discussion with somebody once about honey, and sort of the hardline vegan, or the vegan view is that one does not include honey because it's an animal product. And this discussion was around, well, I was taking the view that surely it's better to use sort of some honey that comes from the guy down the road who's looks after his bees and this, that and the other, and takes a little bit of honey off of, now and again. Surely it's better to do that than it is to use sugar that's been imported halfway across the planet, grown by practically slave or very exploitative, labour, with all the fossil fuel inputs. I suppose you could say, well, you don't have to have either, but just in this kind of, just the question around absolutism, I think it was,
that's my experience as well. If you talk to vegan people who come from a clear consumerism point of view, the picture's often black or white. Whereas when you come from an agricultural point of view, of course we exploit bees because we want them to pollinate our crops. And you could say, well, it's a kind of, they're not there by accident. We put the beehive there because we want use of them, regardless of the honey issue, really. And the more you're involved with agriculture, the picture is much more grey shades than it is from a consumerism point of view. And I quite often find that sort of difficult to balance, really.
And I think one of the things, about that, I think basically at the end of the day, things have fuzzy edges, and human beings are just totally inconsistent, and that's why they're great. They're contradictory, they're inconsistent, and as soon as you get into the place of this is what I am, and I identify as this, you just end up in this total straitjacket where you just end up tripping yourself up, really, I think, and there'll always be someone there who can pick up on the thing that you didn't do right, and so it's just about not being too hard on yourself and not being too hard on others, I guess, partly.
Just that thing about bees, is there a way that you could do that by planting wildflowers or having companion plants that would attract more bees rather than having a hive? Just whether there's other ways around
Well,
that.
you need insects one way or the other.
Yeah.
So
Oh yeah, sure.
at which point you exploit that sort of symbiosis? Or relationship, whatever you want to call it. I think it's just a symbiosis. If you don't have to touch the honey issue, but you want some insects to pollinate your crops. So if you place a hive there, where does exploitation start? They're going to live somewhere, or there. I mean,
Yeah.
you know.
That's
So
a
if
good
you
point
really
about-
want to be a hardline, you say, well, you know, I only go for self-pollinated crops, or I only do vegetables and no fruit. But it's got to be, there are more shades to it than the consumer, the vegan hardline consumer wants to believe, really.
I think it's a good question to ask though, the how, you know,
Yeah.
like, is there an option?
Yeah.
But even with, I mean, I know we're not here to talk about bees or honey, but even within the beekeeping movement, there's like a barefoot honey movement, because some honey is produced where they do feed the bees sugar to improve the yield, which seems completely bonkers, doesn't it? So I think asking, what's the minimal impact we can have here? How much less can we do?
Yeah.
I think you have an impact just by existing, don't you? So perhaps I always ask myself is, what's the intention of the relationship? So you can say that just, you know, to have an animal is ownership and it's all bad, but if your intention is not to own it, is to care for it, is that different? Does it make it okay, or is it surely not the intention of your relationship with the animal that makes the difference, or not? I don't know.
I think if you're providing something in return for the services of the insects, then it's not exploitation. I mean, because I don't keep a hive, but I do what you suggested. I planted loads of borage and phacelia and loads of plants to attract bees, and I had plenty of bees in the garden and a good crop, but I wasn't keeping bees. And I don't feel that I exploited the bees by attracting them to the garden.
You probably had some from somebody else's hive.
Yeah.
Possibly,
Almost certainly.
but I was giving them
Yeah.
food, you know, I laid on a feast for them and they came. So I didn't feel that's exploitation, I think that's balance.
I was of the view that I'm vegan, I don't eat honey, and I was like that for 30 years, probably about 25 years. And then myself and a friend, we went on a trip with organic gardeners up to visit a local orchard that's quite near us, and they, the tour was going around. But me and my mate, because we're a bit anarchic, we left the tour and went wandering off by ourselves to explore, the orchard and that. And we came across this field a little bit away from the orchard, but it's still on the guy's land, where there was like these beehives and they were wrapped in plastic. And we thought, what was going on here? And this sort of old boy came over who was looking after them. And we said, excuse me, mate, why are those beehives? He goes, well, we have to wrap them in plastic, because if I don't do that, the woodpecker, he'll be in there, he'll knock a hole in there, then the mouse, he'll be in there, just the mouse, the one mouse, the mouse, he'll be in there, and he'll eat all of it, and all right, and we ended up in a really long chat with this guy, and he obviously really, really looked after his bees, and he cared about them and everything. And then later we were talking to the guy whose orchard it was, and he was one of the last kind of, the whole of that area of Norfolk was, like all the orchards years ago. But he was saying about how he'd had this really bad year where they had really, basically very few apples, because they'd had a late frost, so very few apples. Very bad apple crop, that's what I'm trying to say. And he was saying, the only thing, he was also selling, he doesn't sell honey as a main thing, but it's like a little, high value kind of boutique thing he was selling as well, homemade honey from the orchard sort of thing. And he was saying the sales of the honey actually kept him going that year, actually made the difference between that orchard going under and going, it was a family business going back generations, but that would have been the last year, if he hadn't have survived that year, that the orchard would have all been, like most of his neighbours, had all been turned into caravan parks by now. And, I think that really raised, it's not just black and white, I must admit, I hadn't eaten honey for 25 years, I bought a jar there and then, because I just thought, well, how can, it's just not black and white, is it? It's grey areas, And that's permaculture thinking as well, you know, you're not just dependent on the one income stream, you know, permaculture is about, you know, the resilience of having, you know, something in the system goes wrong or doesn't work one year, you've got backups. And in his case it was like, you know, I don't even make huge amounts of money from the honey, it was just enough to get through that year, and then next year got back on track with, you know, the apple crops again. So it just raises that it's not always, and I think, you know, it's about that kind of, you know, it's not black and white thinking. I think that's the issue that I kind of have with a lot of things, you know. So, yeah. I suppose we're sort of going into the Q&A type thing already, so, you know, and I must admit, I'm kind of a bit on the fly, because I was to be showing films now, and that's not happening, so I'm happy to sort of be a bit of a Q&A, general chat, if people are happy for that, to roll in that way, until our musicians arrive.
I find it really helpful just for you to describe what's different about your plot, small holding, land, compared to, you know, an average conventional.
In what sense?
Well, I don't know. I don't know. Is it different? Would you see a difference if we came to visit you?
You'd see a mess, I think. In what, in it being vegan or being permaculture?
In it being permaculture, I think.
Yeah, I don't think there's much visually that you would see. It's about making links and connecting. Like I say, you know, it's about how you the permaculture design. If someone came to my allotment, leaving aside the fact that my allotment's been a complete mess for the last few years for various reasons, if it was up and productive as it should be, and you came and looked at it, you wouldn't see anything different to what you'd see, because the people who tend to have allotments, you know, tend to have had, you know, or a lot of the older allotment keepers, they may use the odd chemical and that, but they're basically practicing permaculture, because they, you know, there's all the recycling going on, small scale, it's intensive growing, that's permaculture, really. So it would be, you know, I think, but where the design is how it fits in with those other aspects of, the lady who said that it's not just the food growing, it's how it connects to, you know, your lifestyle and things like, you know, we don't own a car, things like that, you know, if we're travelling about, you know, I live in South England Sea, which is kind of built up urban area. Most people have a car because you have a car, don't you? But we actually sort of think, well, do we need one? We used to have a van, it was just nothing but headache, you know, you was thinking about, you know where to park it, was got to get your MOT done, it was just nothing but stress and hassle, and we just decided, well, let's just not have one, we can just get around town by cycling. We do need a car for some reason, you can hire one for the day or borrow one or something. So it just sort of how all those things sort of connect up. The whole recycling, you know, that was talked about. I think so. It's not just about the food growing. In, you know, sometimes permaculture can be mistaken. One of the first things I say if I'm teaching a permaculture course is permaculture is not about gardening. You know, a lot of people think, permaculture, that's a way of gardening. It's about having a herb spiral. It's about doing a sheet mulch bed. It's about doing this, that, and the other. Well, no, they're just techniques that you can use in any garden. You know, the permaculture design is about how you kind of fit all those things together. Does that skillfully avoid your question?
No, that's really helpful.
Right. Okay, good.
Is there anything you do differently in vegan permaculture than what you've kind of learned from just permaculture principles? Do you have to take different approaches? Are there different limitations?
Certainly not on a small scale, I don't think. You know, it's a moot point really, because most people who, like I say, some people keep the odd chicken or something like that. Most people in an urban context, you know, I don't know anyone's got a pig or a cow that's on their allotment, you know, so you're kind of practicing kind of veganic permaculture as it is. I think when you're moving up, the debate comes through, I think, when you're moving up to a broader scale. I don't know, is there anything you want to say on that, Nicole, because you've done
Yeah, there's a group called the Vegan Organic Network who developed some kind of standards for like more professional growers, kind of market gardeners, people that are marketing their produce as kind of stock free. and I'm a stock wheat grower. So just thinking about horticulture now, not necessarily permaculture, but just broadly the difference between those systems is we don't import like animal manure or fertilizer or blood and bone fertilizer, and it's all about kind of optimizing like plant-based fertility. So using like lots of compost tea, compost that we've made on site, green manures that can kind of like catch and keep the nutrients in the soil. Loads of biodiversity, kind of like humane pest control, you know, basically optimizing how wild animals interact with the site. So I don't have any animals. Some like vegan market gardeners, for example, might have animals on site, but they're not to like kind of sell or, you know, slaughter or anything like that. They might be like rescued animals or dogs or stuff like that. But the site where I live in Somerset, we've got 4 acres, is like totally plant-based, no animals, no animal input, and there's like a whole directory of projects like that on the internet. So I guess the vegan permaculture bit comes in the sense that like I'm not confident just like importing compost. Like my sad ambition in life is to just be like totally self-sufficient in compost, enough to like sustain a plant nursery and to keep our like veg beds and stuff up together.
Because on my allotments, manure is like the talk of, you know, 90% of conversations are about manure.
Yeah.
It's like manure is the secret, you know.
I am interested to hear how your garden performs in a purely plant-based environment. I mean, do you find that you have problem with nutrient deficiencies or anything like that, or is it all?
No, I mean, I'm not doing the like levels of soil testing that like large broad-scale commercial growers would do in terms of, but I think the biggest indicator of health is like the plants.
Yeah.
And say for example a couple of summers ago when it was like super wet and everyone like lost all their crops, you know, there's growers in the room and everyone was like moaning and la la la. Or like we hardly had any losses at all, and people were visiting our site in the summer just being like, well, how the hell have you got those? How have you still got carrots? La la la. So it's all about soil. We're just like absolutely soil obsessed, and because we're not dependent on external inputs, we have to design in ways in our system to be more self-reliant in terms of fertility.
So how do you do that? Like increase the fertility or the nutrients of your soil without adding anything else?
So we have like a quite rich clay soil, so it's like nutrient dense anyway. So it's kind of more about like accessing those nutrients, because people are like obsessed with nutrients all the time, but actually they just like cycle around the land anyway. So it's about how are those accessible to plants. So yeah, we make like tons of compost, green manures, loads of mulching, compost teas occasionally, a bit lazy on compost tea making, but it is a tool. Loads of like wild plants like that can bring up minerals from the soil and stuff. But I don't want to like get into the horticultural stuff, because like what Graham said, it's, you know, it's about the design system like holistically in our society. But that's how we manage it. But we've got the privilege of like scale. So my compost bins are like the size of this room, like 4 of them. So most people don't have that on an allotment, but then they don't have as many needs on an allotment for fertility, so they can maybe make enough through their home compost and their green manures on their site and stuff. So
one of the kind of things that's kind of the arguments that's thrown against, you know, sort of veganic or non, you know, systems without kind of large mammals in, if you like, is that, you know, well, you've got to have cows in to retain, or you've got to have, you know, to retain the fertility. But the fertility is only the fertility that was there anyway, being cycled through an animal. So it's and often that fertility is actually taken, as Nicole was talking about, bringing compost in. You know, often a lot of animal-based, you know, a lot of that fertility is raised through taking manure from somewhere else. So that the fertility in your soil is what you've robbed almost like from somewhere else. Does that kind of make sense? And I think one of the other things I think is really, and I'll talk about it more in my book, is that moving actually away from kind of annual based sort of what we call or growing systems, moving more towards perennial and permanent systems, like, you know, for the last however many thousands of years we've been kind of reliant on grains, which are, you know, obviously retain, you know, need a lot of looking after. You know, it's that kind of whole cycle. You have to grow them every year. Whereas in we'd be looking more, you know, a long-term vegan agricultural system would be looking more towards like tree crops, moving much more towards perennial plants and tree crops, so that rather than our primary sources of kind of like carbohydrates and proteins being kind of like wheat, corn and those sort of things, we're actually looking at, you know, that we'd be looking more towards things like nuts, hazelnuts, chestnuts, those sort of things. So you're actually looking at a totally rethought way, you know, in the longer term, you know. That's kind of what we'd be moving more towards. So when this kind of figure about, well, you know, we could be self-reliant on a third of the land, a third to a half of the land, or 25% of the land, whatever, I think that's looking at much more. Because one of the other arguments is, well, a lot of land isn't suitable for growing crops. You know, it's only suitable for growing trees. Well, great, we'll grow trees. We'll grow edible, you know, nut trees, and, you know, which is what this country was, you know. Our whole agricultural system, that kind of nature's trying to do its thing. You know, the UK was basically a forested country. You know, it's basically covered in woodland. Even like the Highlands of Scotland, that everyone thinks of being, you know, the wilderness. They're only like that because people started grazing sheep there. That basically destroyed the whole ecosystem there. The whole of that used to be a forest, and we're talking about, or I'm talking about in that book, kind of moving back towards that, the forest. You know, and that's what nature's trying to do all the time. You know, trying to bring back the forest, and we're constantly, no, we need that land for our, you know, our corn and our wheat and all this kind of stuff. So actually, by working with nature, we'd actually be welcoming back that whole woodland, you know, the tree cover, and looking how can we actually. I think we're actually, you know, I'm very influenced by, you know, this woman who I may have mentioned her, Kathleen Janaway. Published a little booklet, the Movement Compassionate Living. She published a little booklet called Abundant Living in the Coming Age of the Tree. And it was all basically this whole vision of, you know, moving beyond oil-based culture to tree-based culture. And I don't think, you know, we know what that world would look like any more than our ancestors would have been able to understand the world we live in, you know, after oil. You know, I think the world will be that different, you know, or before the plough, you know. Could the people before the plough have envisioned what the world would look like after the development of the plough? Could the people who lived before the age of oil visualise the world we're living in at the moment, sort of thing? And I think we're looking at that kind of same total paradigm shift, you know, that a world we don't know what it's going to look like, basically. So, yeah, I suppose a bit extreme, really, but... yeah, any other kind of questions or?
Just thinking of kind of the more agroforestry stuff and going with the nut crops and the things that are providing more proteins and stuff, because we don't always traditionally have lots of those things in this country, the fats and the proteins and stuff. Mm-hmm. But what about deer and squirrels? How can we design systems that don't encourage a proliferation, I guess, of those animals if we don't want to?
That's a very good question. I don't know if I know the answer. Yeah. Nicole, I'll let you field that one.
Well, I think it's a case of like coming back to permaculture is like learning from nature. Observation is like the primary thing of like how we can learn. And okay, how have deer populations been sustained through nature? You know, it's like apex predators. It's like wolves, you know, other animals. So I think it's like you can't think of permaculture as this like just your own back garden. Like we have to think of it as like a whole ecosystem. You know, even like a global level of connecting up habitats and everything else. And that's why all the social stuff comes in, because if we were going to have things like wolves then we need to have a change in land ownership patterns to like be able to kind of rewild that amount of landscape. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's like we've altered our ecosystem so much that like, you know, there probably isn't ever such a balance, but like how we get back to that is, yeah, I think the only way we can do that is by learning from nature. Yeah, saying, wolf, please.
with grey squirrels, which were introduced to this country from America, totally unknown in a natural system, and they eat vast amounts of hazelnuts. I mean, has anyone actually gone out and tried to harvest wild hazelnuts that are brown and ready to eat?
Last year was a mass year for hazelnuts, and I got a dustbin full, but it's been
Yes, it was a good
10
year
years
last year actually.
since.
Yeah.
But most of our deer species are not native. It was a question I was going to ask about non-natives. What vegan permaculture thinks of non-natives?
I'm not even sure what that means, non-native, because you know what.
Species.
Yeah, what's non-native? You know, apples are non-native. If we just grew stuff that was native, we'd still be eating.
But by the same token,
acorns, right?
non-native.
Not even acorns, because I don't think oak wasn't initially. That came over from France in the last ice age, coming over here, growing in our forests.
But the ones that are.
Saying everything was non-native. But
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those. I mean, some people get really het up about that kind of stuff, don't they? But you know, we're at a place now. You can't roll back things to how they. You know, it's sort of the whole non-native argument. To me, it's like things have changed. Things move around, don't they? Things move around the planet. Like saying, you know, oaks came over here in the last ice age, and you know, the Romans brought. No, they didn't bring the apples over, but they brought over the cultivars that we kind of use, and they brought over the grafting techniques that we kind of learned to use, sort of, and stuff. So nothing's, you know, this idea, I don't know, it can be a bit tied up with sort of almost like racial purity sort of stuff. I don't know. Sometimes I'm uncomfortable with words like native and non-native and that, because things just kind of evolve and change.
Control.
There are ones that don't have any natural predators
I think
at all.
that's the point really, because I think it's Britain being an island. It's just unfortunate that the previous generation was so successful in removing predators that now, be it the grey squirrel or take it the American crayfish, are so successful in exploiting those gaps. Whereas, like if you look at like continental Europe, where there's a far more complex animal presence there in predators, those animals who find a big gap here find it really difficult to like gain a foothold in the natural environment. And I think it's just the imbalance that was caused here by history, that there's no predators here.
I just say we are a predator.
Yeah, not to a squirrel though.
Well, why not? I've been a vegetarian my whole life, and I'm now considering going meat eater and vegan.
Yeah.
Because I can't any longer justify the dairy and the exploitative nature of that, but I can justify if there's going to be grey squirrels and red deer destroying my fruit crops or my nut crops.
Yeah.
I do not consider that. I would consider that a fair move on my part, and I think.
But I mean,
that's an interesting.
Shift hasn't happened yet. I mean, you couldn't go into a butcher and buy squirrel. You find it difficult.
No.
I mean, there are some there, but you know.
But I suppose just talking
in the moment,
on
the
principle
squirrel
basis.
has like, you know, you're not an animal or an enemy to the squirrel. You just.
I could be.
You could be. Yeah.
I think it's about like all of this stuff just leads to more questions, and that's really important. We need to be like investing time and energy and money in like research of like, how can we better protect nut crops from squirrels? You know, like Martin Crawford from Agroforestry Research Trust. You know, he does actually like shoot and trap squirrels, but he did try for like 10 years, like all sorts of stuff, like snakes and like fake snakes in trees and like noises, certain times, like,
Mm.
you know, we don't have all the answers to this stuff, so I think it's more like, cool, we've identified that that's something we need to research, we need more models.
It's really difficult.
Yeah. But I also think this thing about culls and, oh, we need to shoot this because they're affecting this, it's like, you know, there's like humans trying to like cut down all the trees that feed Bristol, and we're not like, right, we just need to like shoot those contractors, you know, they're just causing too much harm, we need to shoot them. So it's like, there is an element of speciesism in how we make decisions about what deserves to die and what deserves to live. I'm not on camera saying to shoot any contractors. Make that 100% clear if that goes on the internet.
I have a question about permaculture and politics. And because sometimes I've been to talks where people talk about permaculture, and I always bring up, it's like with my political friends, I always bring up the stuff about the environment and food, and with the people who are more into permaculture, I always bring up politics, because it doesn't seem, sometimes there's not this crossover, and to me it seems it's explicitly political, like permaculture. You know, if you're going by the principles of fair share, earth care, people care, you know, that's, you know, you can't, that involves a huge shift in the social distribution of resources and how you treat the planet and this sort of thing. And do you see that split when you teach? Because you teach people as well, don't you? And like people who are like, oh, I just want to go, you know, I get this like, I just want to go and have my little small holding in Devon or something. And I think, well, yeah, but I'm more interested in like what happens to Barton Hill in Bristol, which is a big, you know, poor, deprived area of Bristol where people, you know, haven't got land or access to, you know, right, they can do something a little bit on their balconies and things like that. But how does, you know, like to me, if you need to have that massive scale social change, as well as, so I just wonder what your thoughts are on that. I mean, how you get there?
Yeah,
the barriers.
It depends. That's no. I totally personally, I totally agree. Yeah, I think it is. You know, those ethics, earth care, people care, fair shares. How much more political can you get? You know, depending on what you mean by the. But I think there can be this kind of sometimes. This kind of neutrality. You know, this kind of some permaculture. A lot of people within permaculture seem to have this thing, you know, about seem to be neutral a lot of the time, and I think, yeah, I think, and I must, you know, around. When I first kind of started getting in, my back, you know, I'll be upfront about my background, you know, it's like kind of anarchist, political, direct action, protest, all that kind of stuff. And I kind of got to this place of realising that a lot of my focus had been kind of like, not exactly negative, but it was around stopping stuff, you know, like stopping the poll tax, stopping road, you know, road building, stopping animal exploitation, stopping the war, whatever it was. I just got to a point that, like, I've spent the last 20 years stopping stuff. I want to start some stuff now. That's how I kind of arrived at permaculture personally. And so it came, when, I don't mind that in a, if I say positive and negative, I'm not saying, you know, that it's negative as in it's bad, but it's kind of like negatively focused rather than proactively positive. So I kind of moved to that kind of space, I think. And round about the time that this would have been like towards the end of the last century, you know, like 97, 98, 99, there seemed to be a lot of optimism about the new millennium, and there seemed to be a lot of change, you know, things seemed to be changing for the better, and, you know, and my kind of thing was, yeah, you know, like, kind of embracing that kind of, that neutrality a bit myself, and, you know, we're all working together. But this last lot of bastards are coming. Like, you just got to choose a side, haven't you? You know, I think you just got to choose a side. You know, the way things are at the moment. And
do you think there's any difference between all of them?
Me personally, do I think?
Yeah. Because there's no sides to choose, is there? There's just one lot or another lot, as far as I can see.
It gets a whole new debate here. Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to carry this on, but
I actually think what this chap said is absolutely right. When I spoke here about the word permaculture and what people see it as, and an awful lot of permaculturists see their future as running off to doorstep and growing their own vegetables and letting the rest of the world go to hell and house, basically. And it needs to be peri-urban.
yeah, I mean,
and
that whole, you know,
political.
getting a bit of land and pissing off to the country doesn't interest me, you know, and I'm not particularly interested in, you know, no, because, you know, you can run away from the world, but the world won't run away from you.
That's the thing. How many guns are you going to have? Because if with that thinking, it's like, well, if you're not taking everyone along with you, you're not going to, like, so you think, like, you know, people aren't just going to come and take your small holding, because of course they will, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, so it has to be a whole society thing. I mean, I have a theory that what we can do is we can just build a wall around London at some point and not let any of them out. Like the reverse of enclosures. They want to live there, let them live there, just build a wall around it and say, right, you will move. We'll make a better London.
We wouldn't be here if you did that.
I feel like all the you know, it's just being completely bought up, isn't it, by mega rich.
Isn't the Green Party, though, sort of mainstreaming some of those issues? About sustainability, about peak oil, about food?
Yeah, I suppose they're talking about those issues, Yeah, but I think we all know, as soon as the Green Party get a toehold in, they'll just, that thing, I'm just sure that, you know, however I do, you know, you get into power, and I'm sure someone calls you to a little room, this is how it really is, you know. I'm pretty sure that's what kind of happens, you know. It's very nice, but this is what, you know. I don't know, I mean, I guess I kind of support the Green Party. I don't hold out a lot of hope, you know. So.
I think we can wait for these politicians for years, decades, to try and do stuff for our environment and for us how to live, but at the end of the day, we've got to make the step. No one's going to do none of these things. No one's going to try and make the place how we want it when they've got so many other invested interests and they got you know, they're pretty all powered by oil companies. Or, you know, it's all I think it's down to us to make, even if it's a small thing, because I live in London and I have a lot of friends that may live in like a council flat and they're so disconnected from the environment, but luckily I've been brought up in a house and my parents built my house and I've had a garden, and like just for me, even getting into the vegan world and cooking vegan food, I showed some of my friends this and that, and when you can do your little thing, just show people, even if it's a small thing, maybe not on a whole scale of permaculture, but just small things, it opens up people's mind that may not necessarily get the chance to be close to the environment, and that's why they might drop the litter on the road or not really care about animals, because they're so far away from that. And like, I think it's important to try and do these things in London, because yeah, like you said, we can all go to Devon or try and have that dream of, but that's unrealistic. And I think, how can we try and make like London an urban jungle or something where we're doing stuff? And yeah, I think these politicians, they don't know nothing, man. Whether it's the Green, I'm going to vote for Green, but at the end of the day, I know it's politics and it's down to us to do what we need to do, and if you have the chance to do it, then yeah.
I think they're getting desperate now, though, because I've never voted, but this year was the first time that I actually got a letter saying that if you do not vote or you don't register to vote, you can be fined up to £2,000. I've never had that before. So they're threatening to fine people now if they don't vote.
I had something similar.
Yeah. I've never had that before.
I think that's just if you don't register to vote.
I've never registered to vote. Never. Sorry. I've just never bothered.
I'm from London as well, and I know it's easy to think that this is a sort of middle class movement of people going and grabbing sort of land at the moment, but there are also people who believe that 21st century is going to be the century of re-realisation. People are going to be moving out of cities again, back to the land. And I've seen some examples of people who have gone out, and they are really hustling with the authorities to actually be able to build houses out of wood, and they are kind of pioneering out there actually and saying, can we have a little bit of land to build our own house out of trees and grow a bit of grub? And the housing authorities, the planning regulations are down on them like a ton of bricks, actually. So they are actually breaking some new ground there as well, whatever class they're from, you know.
I don't think it's either or, is it? You know, it's not about black and white. It's like those fuzzy edges, and it's like, you know. I think, yeah. And yeah, I mean, it's the one of the things in permaculture is we try and avoid monocultures, you know, because we prefer polycultures, and I think that's, you know, what it's all about. You know, you've got some people kind of, like you're saying, you know, struggling with authorities about planning permission and trying to set up woodland communities or whatever. You've got people doing stuff in cities, you've got people working kind of maybe, you know, whether it's the Green Party or, you know, working within, I don't know, the more enlightened parts of the lake. There's people just doing stuff everywhere, and you can't have one, you know, it's a continuum, I think, you know. Like, yeah, so I think, yeah.
Do you think that the sort of Buckminster Fuller view of go round and round and oppose it is more valid than beating your head against, you know, the powers that be?
Well, it's like, you know, for some people, you know, beating their head against the powers that be might be the place where they feel, you know, and it changes for different people at different times, you know, like. Yeah, I don't do the stuff I was doing 20, 30 years ago, you know, but I don't think that invalidates what I was doing 20, I'm just a bit old now, you know, so you just go in different areas, you know. So I always remember there was a magazine called Do or Die out a few years, I can't remember who published it, but it was like kind of from the radical end of kind of the eco movement, and there was something a bit in there was some article about kind of activists, you know, like road protesters, you know, you do it for a few years and then you know, kind of like go and get your permaculture plot and, you know, this kind of thing, and like and sell out, basically, it was saying. And so, well, you know, maybe, and I wrote an article kind of responding to that, saying, you know, that it's just what's appropriate at different times of your life where you feel you're in, you know, if you're just constantly, you know, throwing yourself in front of bulldozers or whatever, you're chaining yourself to, you can do that. Cause it's like I was saying, you know, I got to this point of like, I just can't do this stuff anymore, you know, but that doesn't mean that I'm just going to get a suit and work in an office and start, you know, it's just like, no, there's nothing wrong with that in itself either, but, you know, you just reach what I'm glad other people are still doing it, but I can't do that anymore. Does that kind of respond to your question slightly?
My view is to just go around it. You know, to fight everything is bad by just doing good stuff instead.
I will say, so I think quite slightly misunderstood your question actually. Yeah, but yeah, well, yeah, go around it. I'd go along with that. Yeah, rather than.
I think resistance is really, really necessary, and I think it's part of it, and I think like you can apply design to resistance as well to make it more effective. So. For example, I was doing the permaculture diploma, and one of my designs in the portfolio was for Frack Free Somerset, which is like an anti-fracking coalition that I did for 2-3 years, and it was like I could build a kind of permaculture demonstration site in Somerset and like do loads of community organising in towns and stuff in Bridgewater and all this, but like if they're just going to like pollute our water, then all of that's redundant. So it's like sometimes we do need to resist, and I think it's like how can we build those relationships between people resisting and building alternatives, and not see each other as separate but see each other as allies. Yeah, like, you know, they got a protest site up the road and local growers might be donating veg, you know, or, you know, whatever. Like, I just think they're really linked. I think there's no need to separate them when they're essential, and for some communities to be able to even practice something like permaculture, then they have to, like, you know, fight fracking or other forms of extreme energy, or, you know, resist the police or prison system, or yeah, I think they can be linked, and I think they're more powerful, like this thing of diversity is health. Like in your garden, diversity is health, and I think in creating change, like diversity is health as well.
Everything is connected though, isn't it? The kind of the ripples go out forever, because one of the other things that's often said is people have lost cooking skills. So quite often people don't know what to do with vegetables. You know, even if they had vegetables, you know, that's not how they, you know, they don't know how to make them into meals, or if they want to become vegan, they're not sure how they'll be healthy. So, you know, there's like always another question after the one that you've sort of explored.
Okay. Anything anybody else kind of wants to say or ask, or I think it's getting to 10 to 9. Did the people with instruments turn up? They don't seem to have done, do they?
I really wanted to know from this talk was, you know, you mentioned Abundant Living in the World of Trees, which is a book I've thankfully read. It's been a really interesting read. It is a model which involves a hell of a lot of tree crops that take 15 to 20 years to actually produce anything. No one's actually even begun planting nut trees to actually grow these, you know, to even start the things off. So do you have a model or even just a transitory idea of how we can go from here to a local vegan permaculture lifestyle? I mean, it is down to food, because the main thing that we exploit animals for is food and certain nutritional requirements, and it just, yeah, how do you have an idea of how we can live a vegan local?
I think we just start planting trees now, really, and if it's going to take a long time to start producing, then now is when we start. I think you just start by doing what you can. I don't think there is a model that you can hold up as such, but just go for it, I think.
I know that there's a lot of guerrilla gardeners in places like San Francisco where they've started grafting fruit-bearing, you know, they've started grafting fruit trees to yield crops in public spaces. So maybe you have ornamental fruit trees that weren't really bearing crops. So guerrilla gardeners have just gone along and started grafting them, and now they have fruit in public spaces. I think it is like he was saying, you just do your bit. Go out and just do it.
I mean, there's a nice book, or there's a guy called Mark Shepherd who's published a book called Restoration Agriculture, which actually talks quite a lot about moving, you know, the transition from kind of grain crops and those kind of annual based crops and moving towards like tree based. And he's, you know, and again, he's not coming from a idealistic or theoretical perspective. He's got kind of, you know, he's doing this stuff, I think in Wisconsin or somewhere like that, somewhere in America. You know, and he's making a good, you know, he's moved to kind of fruit and nut crops basically. He's not vegan, he has pigs and stuff as well, but a lot of the stuff, and he says in the book, this could easily be adapted to a vegan or vegan organic system. But I think, you know, becoming familiar with some of those ideas, and, you know, he's making a living out of doing that and doing very nicely with it. And so I suppose, you know, the more we can kind of support, you know, not only by what we're doing ourselves, but kind of putting our support towards those models as well, I guess, you know. Does that kind of make, you know, does that make sense? You know, it is a transitional thing, you know, I mean, we've got a hell of a long way to go, you know, so.
I think it's interesting though, like with, because I talk to a lot of groups, transition groups, and they look like very, you know, it's like I need to do everything, and there's this real like, and people Burnett really quite a lot and stuff, and I think that it's just a thing about like understanding that actually complexity needs a complexity to, you know, and this is why I'm more sympathetic towards different models of organising society that are non-hierarchical, because they can't deal with complexity. So, like the state can make it very difficult to do things, but it can also make it a lot easier as well. So it's not either or it's, you know, it's not black and white. But there is a thing of I read this guy Stafford Beer, and he was talking about, you know, there's this thing about needing complexity to deal with complexity, and if you don't, you restrict things. So actually, by everyone doing their little bit, you contribute towards this huge complexity of change which is happening globally, at the moment, and there is. I mean, you won't read about it in the Daily Mail, you know, because it's not in their interest to print it. But you know, like when you look online at what people are doing, it's vast, and a lot of it is small things. But when there's so many people doing those small things, it all adds up to something, doesn't it? You know,
yeah.
Well, how many animals does an average person eat? 30 years, loads, isn't it?
Loads, thousands.
Yeah. So if you become vegetarian, you know, everyone who was vegetarian stops that quite a lot of stuff. So it's like not feeling too bad about not doing everything, I think. One of the things like that to groups. Yeah, do you know. And have a pint and have fun.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely, yeah.
Kind of you.
Yeah, depends if you know, honestly, maybe, or orange juice.
What was the film that you were going to show? Is it something that you watch online?
Yeah, you can watch them both on. There was a couple of films actually. There was one called it was a documentary that was made in like 1976 actually about the vegans. The Vegan Society made it. Have you seen it?
I think so.
Yeah, and it's like it was made in 1970, but it looks like it's made about 1956 or something. It's really kind of dated and old, but it's great. It's a period piece, but it also puts across all the stuff on quite, you know, those. I've not seen a better film promoting veganism than that one. I've seen like some hard-hitting things, you know, that there is, but this one's just so, you know, nicely done, you know, and convincing. So there was that one that's called, I think it's called Open Door, and it's on YouTube and that. And the other one was a little film about this guy Ian Tolhurst, who's got like he doesn't actually use the word vegan, organic, or permaculture or anything himself, because he tries to avoid words that sort of like, you know, might have baggage. So he just calls himself a stock-free grower, but it's just about his land and, you know, how he's managed to maintain fertility and, you know, without using animal products and stuff. So yeah, so they're the two to watch. Although there's lots to watch. They were the two I'm going to show though. So. Okay, so it's sort of 9 o'clock. I don't know what happened to it. I think we're... Thank you.